Welcome back, class. Today we're going to continue our study of the human reproductive system by looking at the female structures and their functions. So we'll do a lot of comparison back and forth to the male and the female. So if you remember in the male gamete was the sperm. In the female, we call the male gamete or sex cell the egg or ovum. So that's another word you have to know is ovum. Just like the male gamete, just like the sperm cell, the egg contains 23 chromosomes. That's the haploid number, half of what a new baby will need to be created. But unlike the sperm, the egg cell is very, very large. In fact, it's the biggest cell in the entire human body. Egg cells are so large that you can see them with your naked eye. You do not need a magnifying glass or a microscope to see an egg cell. It's about the size of a period at the end of a sentence on a worksheet or in a book that you'd be reading. So you can see the little tiny dot of the egg cell without using any magnification. In the male, we talked about the testes as the male reproductive gland. The ovary is the female reproductive gland. And just like the testes, females have two of them. But unlike the male, they are tucked inside the body and they're not visible from the outside. It's where the eggs or ova are produced. And just like the testes produce the male sex hormone testosterone, the ovaries produce the female sex hormones known as estrogen and progesterone. That's only two of the hormones that females produce. There's going to be two others that you'll learn about when we talk about the menstrual cycle on Monday. So females make their eggs through meiosis just like males do, but they call this process oogenesis. When you think of O's, think of ovaries, think of ovulation. The O's always relate to the female body. There's some things that are very similar about oogenesis and spermatogenesis. They both result in the haploid cells with half of the number of chromosomes, so it would be 23. But unlike the male production of sperm, when a female produces her eggs, only one functioning egg is produced, even though the cells divide twice and produce four unique cells. Only one of them is an egg. The other three are called polar bodies, which are discarded and cannot develop into an offspring. And the reasoning for that is all of the organelles and the nutrients that are being used by the original cell get transferred down the line to that one egg. So it'll have more mitochondria for energy production. It'll have more ribosomes for protein production. It'll have more cytoplasm and nutrients for the developing embryo. So it gives the baby a good head start. And then the last thing you need to know is that girls are all born with their immature eggs. So if a little girl is born, she already has all the eggs she will have for her lifetime. They're not mature and ready to be fertilized, but they're there inside her ovaries. And we'll learn again more about that when we get to the menstrual cycle as to how they're released. All right, so everything in the female reproductive system is pretty much internal. And this is just, again, a rough diagram showing you the front view. And I'll just take you through from A to D. A is the ovary, and if you'll notice, there's one on the left and one on the right, just like with testes. And then a tube connects the ovary to the next structure, and this is called the fallopian tube, you may have heard of, or also called the oviduct. So eggs will be released from the ovary, travel through the fallopian tube, and they will come to structure C, which would be the uterus. And if a infant is going to be created, or if fertilization had occurred, the embryo would grow and become a fetus and then an infant in structure C, the uterus. We're going to talk about this narrow passage here that the baby will have to pass through. And then D is the vagina or the birth canal. This is where sperm will enter the body and also where the baby will leave the body. The next picture is a side view. There's a couple things to note about the side view. It looks very complex, but it's pretty simple. You'll notice that when in front of the sexual reproductive organs, which are right here in the middle, in front of that is the bladder and connected to the urethra. So you'll see that There's an opening that is just for urine in females. Think back to when we talked about the male. The male shared his reproductive system and the release of sperm with the urinary system and the release of urine. That's not true of females. The female reproductive system is totally separated from her urinary system. So the vagina is behind the urethra, and that connects to the cervix, which is the opening to the uterus, and on each side of the uterus would be an ovary. The other thing to remember is that we didn't talk about it with the male so much, but there's three openings in a female. There's the urethra, the birth canal or vagina, and the anus. The male just has one opening here for the passage of sperm and urine and the anus. So this is a better view of the front, looking at a female's reproductive system. And we're going to go through these numbers on the notes page. And remember, I did attach to the Schoology the notes for the entire unit, so you should have all this, and you could print it and refer to it for when you do your assignments. So the parts of the system. The first part we're going to talk about were the ovaries, and the ovaries are the two structures on either side of the uterus where the eggs are released and where the hormones are produced and released. Now usually what happens is they alternate months. Typically a female will release one ovary per month, and 1 week would be from 1 month would be from one ovary, and it would alternate the following month with the other ovary. Obviously sometimes both ovaries can release an egg, and then we could have the potential for twins, but that's not extremely common. So we talked about the fallopian tube, also known as the oviduct, and that tube carries the egg to the uterus, where the ovary could be fertilized. We're going to get more into that in our next unit when we show the development of an offspring. So if an egg is released, it is going to be released into one of the fallopian tubes, and you would want fertilization to occur somewhere early on in the release. So as sperm entered the body, it would have to swim its way all the way through the fallopian tube to find the egg here, and that would be the best, healthiest opportunity for the creation of an offspring, because the egg has just been released. It's still fresh and it hasn't started to do any kind of decomposing, and that would be ideal. All right, so the next one is the uterus, which will be the site of embryo development, and I'll go ahead and show you the cervix, which is the very lower part of the uterus, which would have to open before the birth of the baby. So when you look at the diagram, after the egg had traveled through the fallopian tube, if it's fertilized, it would have to make its way to land in the uterus. And it could attach to the wall here, or even the top here. Those would be the best places for the embryo to start to develop. Sometimes it can attach really down here, which could be a problem, which we'll learn about later, because you really wouldn't want the placenta to grow in front of where the baby has to pass through. So the embryo would grow and attach to the uterus, spend 9 months here, and then when it's ready to be born, it would have to pass through the cervical canal or the cervix before entering the vagina. This stays closed. The cervix will stay closed with a mucus plug for the entire 9 months, and then when the baby's ready to be born, it would open up, dilate, so that the head can come through first and the rest of the baby could be born. And the last thing to know here is the vagina, also known as the birth canal, and as you saw in the diagram, that's where the baby has to pass through on its way to being born, but it's also where the semen would enter containing the sperm during sexual reproduction, so that the sperm could make its way to the egg and do fertilization. So I hope that is a good explanation for you on the female reproductive system. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, or you could, like I said, you could always private message Mr. Anello or me so that we could answer your questions. Have a great day, everybody.